Thank you, my friend. Thank you. It is so good to be here with you folks. I mean, it really is. For so many reasons. I consider myself the most blessed person around. Preaching and Bible teaching is what I do for purpose and fulfillment. That's what makes me feel like my life is worth living. It's how I make a living, and it's what I do for fun. And when you can tie all those three things together, you are a blessed person. And delighted to see you folks all here tonight. I'm going to ask you to take your Bibles, turn to Lamentations chapter 3, and say a little bit about the background of my having this sermon. Probably goes back about 21 years ago. At the time, I was living in Haines City, Florida. I was at Landmark Baptist College. It's a Wednesday. I'm scheduled to preach at a church in Orlando. And the college ladies trio, 3 singers and a pianist, are scheduled to do music before I preach. And so I have a certain time I'm supposed to pick them up. And I see I have a few minutes, not a long time, but a little bit before I need to leave. I'm already ready. So I'm just sitting reading my Bible for a while. And I get to Lamentations chapter 3, and I'm kind of reading along, not super focused. But then I got to verse 21. And man, this grabbed my attention. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. I don't know about you folks, but that sounds like a good thing to me. We live in sin-cursed bodies with a sin nature, surrounded by people with sin natures, in a world that is organized in rebellion against God. And all that, just having a sin-cursed body, you just become more aware of as you get older. And you don't have to look very far to figure out that this world organized in opposition against God is even more organized than it's ever been in our lifetime before. And the idea, there's something that when you think of it, it fills you with hope. That's good to know. But I didn't have time then to think about it more. I know enough about the Bible to know this. If you want to understand anything in the Bible, look at what comes right before and what comes right after. I said the key to knowing what this means, that whenever I think about this, I have hope, is in this chapter to either right before verse 21 or right after verse 21. But I didn't have time right that moment. So I went and got the young ladies. We drove to the church there. They'd been asked to sing several songs that night. And so I'm sitting there while the young ladies are singing, and I thought I would go back and look at this. And the truth of this passage grabbed me. I threw away the message I had planned, preached that without an outline to it, just the truth of it. And I've been preaching it ever since. I preach it hoping it'll be a blessing to the folks that hear it, but also preach it because it's really a blessing to me. Being reminded of this really helps me. And the crazy world we live in, I need to be reminded of it more and more. So let's just look tonight. The question we're asking ourselves, what is it when you remember it fills you with hope? Verse 1. I am the man that hath seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. I understand that. I mean, there are times God chastens us, it deals with us. He's dealt with me. I understand that, I get it, but I got to be real honest with you. The idea that God chastens us, that is not what fills me with hope. Matter of fact, I'd be really happy if I never have to be chastened again. So let's see if we do any better in verse 2. He hath led me and brought me into darkness, but not into light. Well, that's a blessing, isn't it? Sometimes God leads us and we can't see where he's taking us or what he's doing. And we don't know what his purpose is. And we don't know what the reason is. I get it, but that's not what fills me with hope. Let's try verse 3, see if we get any better. Surely against me is he turned. He turneth his hand against me all the day. Well, that's a blessing. Sometimes God works against us. How about My flesh and my skin, verse 4, hath he made old. He hath broken my bones. Well, that just makes you want to shout hallelujah and run around the church building, doesn't it? Ready? We just get older. What a blessing. When I started going to the Philippines every year, haven't been able to for 2 years now because of COVID restrictions, but I started going to the Philippines every year, and just such a great part of my life and such a great blessing. And the college I teach at, and the college I teach at over there is the 5th floor of a building. Everything like elevators. So you have to walk up 5 floors to get there. And when I first started going, they would always have 2 young men meet me at the bottom of the stairs to take my briefcase and help me up the thing. Like they were worried. I was in my 40s then. They're worried about me getting up, the step. And it used to irritate me that they thought I needed help. And there at the college, we had this 10-story building. So for about a month before I went every year, I would go over every day and walk the 10 stories so that I would be in shape for getting up those stairs. And I'd show up at the bottom of that, and there'd be a couple of young men there to help me, and I'd grab their briefcases and just run up the stairs. Want to know what I do now? Thanks. Just get older. I understand that. Can't tell you that's what fills me with hope, though. Let's try verse 5, see if it works any better. He hath builded against me and compassed me with gall and travail. Sometimes I'm trying to do something, and God keeps me from doing it. What a joy that is. I will tell you as a pastor, I know this. I'm sure a pastor always looks happy and upbeat and like he's on top of everything, but I know the pastorate better than that. We're constantly trying to get something done for the Lord, and it's amazing how much more we could get done with just a little bit more cooperation. I don't care who you are, you find yourself thinking about that. So this was what I planned. This is what I wanted to do. This is what I wanted to accomplish. And God just didn't let me. How about verse 6? Let's see if that fills your heart with hope. Y'all ready? He hath set me in dark places as they that be dead of old. That's a blessing, isn't it? This scene's been in a number of horror movies over the year. Somebody wakes up. They were unconscious. They wake up, they're in a coffin, and they're buried. And there's nothing they can do. Not a move they can take. There's no way to dig out. And all about the horror that they feel when they know they're trapped like that. What a blessing. Sometimes God puts us in places when we don't have any idea what to do. We just feel trapped. Are you all blessed yet? Encouraged? Happy you came? Let's try verse 7. He hath hedged me about that I cannot get out. He hath made my chain heavy. That'll fill your heart with joy, wouldn't it, that thought? I can't get anywhere because like God put a ball and a chain on me and it's too heavy for me. It's like seeing somebody in a convict movie and they just can't go anywhere. Let's see if verse 8 fills us with hope. Also, when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. What a blessing that thought is. Sometimes you pray and you pray and you pray, and it's like your prayers never got above the ceiling, and God didn't choose to answer them. See, I have more than one sermon that I just look at some verses about the glory of prayer and how God blesses through prayer. And I just tell one story after another story after another story about answers to prayer. And it's a blessing. I tried one time an equally honest sermon where I told one story after another about when I begged and pleaded and cried with God and he didn't answer my prayers. I've never preached that again. The look on the people's face when I preached it the one time, I figured out nobody wanted to hear that. Sometimes God doesn't choose to answer our prayers. no matter how fervently we have prayed, no matter how pure our moments of prayer were, sometimes God doesn't choose to answer them. Y'all blessed yet? That's exciting. How about verse 9? He hath enclosed my ways with hewn stone. He hath made my paths crooked. So I'm trying to get somewhere, and it's like he just twists me around, makes me go this way and that way, and I'm just not getting there right, and it's just frustrating, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know how to get there. I understand that verse, but I can't tell you, it doesn't fill my heart with hope. I don't go to bed at night meditating on that verse, wanting to think about that. How about verse 10? He was unto me as a bear lying in wait, and as a lion in secret places. We used to go to a lodge in North Carolina mountains for vacation, and it was right next to the National Bear Preserve. And there were signs that would tell you where the lodge ended and the bear preserve started. But they'd always warn you to be careful because the bears don't pay very good attention to the signs. And they'd say, it's okay. But if you're going to go out in the woods, though, go in a group because the bears hear the noise. Always stay away from, I was there not on vacation, but at a conference that was taking place there and had some things to think over and decisions to make. And I just wanted to be by myself early in the morning and think. And I was walking out in the beauty of the setting, these North Carolina mountains and the forest and all that kind of thing. And I was out by myself. And I went walking around this curve in the path, and there ahead of me was a black bear. And it instantly became obvious that he and I could not both be in charge of that path at the same time. Nature lover that I am, I decided to let him have the path. So I looked at him. And what I'd always been told in situations like that is you don't want to make sudden moves. I really did want to make a sudden move. I went out of there as fast as I could. But I just smiled, backed up slowly and carefully, but constantly, just moving back, till I got around the corner, and then I turned and ran. I didn't care much for running into a bear. I doubt seriously if I'd like running into a lion any better. Filled with hope yet? All these pleasant pictures, verse after verse. How about verse 11? He hath turned aside my ways and pulled me in pieces. He hath made me desolate. That's a pretty picture, isn't it? Another time I was in a woods somewhere and came across a deer that probably had been torn apart by wolves or coyotes or something like that. It was just torn into pieces, a piece here and a piece there, and just pulled into pieces. It was a horrible looking situation. Not a pleasant picture. I don't meditate on it and say, Lord, remind me of that moment. Or how about verse 12 and 13? He hath bent his bow and set me as a mark for the arrow. He hath caused the arrows of his quiver to enter into my reins. Y'all ready? Sometimes it's like God uses us for target practice. I grew up working at this Christian camp. Worked there when I was in high school, college. Eventually became the program director there and then the director. And during summer when I was a program director, we had some visitors. And this camp had wonderful facilities, and it had an area laid out as an archery range. And every year we'd send some counselors to be trained by the American Archery Association, and they would reach certain skill levels, and they'd be given the recognition to give out awards, and campers could come there and be on the archery range, and they could go home with awards from the American Archery Association. And I'm showing some visitors the camp, and so I'm walking them down to the archery range, and I'm bragging about our archery range. It's all regulation. We have American Archery Association approved counselors. And, I'm bragging about what a sophisticated operation this is. And we're walking up to it. And up ahead, you see the archers where they're supposed to be the bows and all that. And there they are. And then further that direction, just the right distance, are the targets. And I'm explaining everything's just regulation and top notch and it's all that. And as I'm talking to them, an arrow comes by my head. Now, I was really unhappy for several reasons. I understood what happened. We had inner city kids there. I've seen it over and over again. All these inner city kids want to use the bow and arrows, but they have no comprehension of how much strength it takes to pull the bow back. So they get a bow, they get an arrow, and they start putting it on there. And when they're pulling back, they're just in shock at how much strength it takes. And because they're in shock and they're doing this, their feet are moving the whole time. So they end up like this. But these highly trained, recognized counselors are supposed to be watching and making sure nothing like this happens. Okay? And number one, I don't like the idea of an arrow passing by my head. Number two, I didn't like being embarrassed in front of all these folks. And I had a bit of a chat later in the day with the staff, and it's entirely possible they knew I was upset before the chat was done. Sometimes you wonder if God isn't using you for target practice. What a pretty picture. Y'all encouraged yet filled with hope. How about verse 14? I was a derision to all my people and their song all the day. So sometimes people just look at us and shake their heads. What is wrong? I was telling Pastor this, I think yesterday. And some years ago, I was scheduled to preach at a church in North Carolina Bible conference. They scheduled me 2 years ahead of time. And 2 years ahead of time, we went through and agreed on the topics for each night like we did here. So the pastor wrote down all the topics I was going to be preaching on. And apparently I'd written the date down on my calendar, but I forgot to do that. So he promoted it to the people. You hear? He got advertisement on a local radio. And I knew I was supposed to preach there, and I showed up, and I forgot all about the fact that I was supposed to preach on those topics. And I went in Sunday morning, preached a message that had nothing to do with the advertised topic. And I knew something was wrong because of the way people were looking at me. It just wasn't right. And bless his heart, I wish the preacher had told me then, because we could have salvaged the rest of the meeting, but he didn't tell me till the meeting was over. So not one single night did my message have anything to do with the announced, promoted, and advertised topic. All week long, I'm coming in the services wondering, what is wrong here? What's going on here? Finally, after the week is over, he tells me. It's kind of a shock to you. I've never been booked to preach another meeting in that church. On more than one occasion, I've preached in a preacher's meeting then with that preacher sitting in the audience. He's never said anything. He's never been impolite, but I walk up in a pulpit and I see him, and I always know what he's thinking. Always. We've all done stupid things, but do you like to meditate on it and remember it? Does it fill your heart with hope when you get a handle on it? I'll tell you, getting old as a preacher is interesting. I mean, seriously. I went to church a couple years ago. It was not long after I'd had an accident and been hit by a semi-truck, and life was a little more difficult and confusing and all that. But I went to church, and I totally forgot the pastor's name. I'd known him for years. It just went. And I'm thinking, I hope no situation comes up where it's going to become obvious I have no idea. Pastor Strickland, by the way. It's not happening to me tonight. In that setting, I'm just sitting there as uncomfortable as I could be because I don't even know that man's name that is up there. We all have moments we'd rather forget, and moments we don't meditate on, and moments that if we think about them, it doesn't fill us with hope. Y'all blessed yet? How about verse 15? He hath filled me with bitterness. He hath made me drunken with wormwood. It's just a part of our old sin nature. Comes natural to not let things go, to be bitter with people, not to forgive. And if you're close to the Lord, He gets you past those moments. But just the fact that God had to do something for you to get you past those moments. I don't know about you, but I don't like to remember that. How about the picture in verse 16? He has also broken my teeth with gravel stones. Boy, that's a blessing, isn't it? How many of you like to meditate for hope on the last time you went to the dentist and had something done to your teeth? May just be all right if we never ever had to see a dentist again. I'll say, I'm having a rough day. I'm going to sit here and think about my last trip to the dentist in order to get everything under control. I mean, just like every other verse, the image in here, He hath covered me with ashes. The image in verse 17, and thou hast removed my soul far off from peace. I forgot prosperity. That'd be a blessing, wouldn't it? We are the most spoiled people in the world in the United States. We know more about prosperity than the rest of the world. We're so prosperous, we don't even recognize it when we're prosperous. I will tell you, mission trips, and the Lord's let me take a number of them to a number of countries. I've been in an awful lot of places. Man, just every moment makes you grateful for what you have, the freedoms we have, the material blessings we have, how we normally live life. But forgot prosperity. What a sad moment that'd be. Y'all blessed yet? Verse 18. And I said, my strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering mine affliction, my misery, the wormwood and the gall. My soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. I don't know about you, but I'm ready to conclude that the explanation for having hope doesn't come before in this passage. See what that means? He's got to come after. Let's try this. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope. It is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because His compassions fail not. How about that to think on for a while? No matter what it is we have to face, and I have seen people in all sorts of settings. I have been with folks when they were dying, and their heart was full of joy, and their heart was full of satisfaction. God gave them something. God did something special. God gave them what they needed when they needed it. Amen. See, it's not the fact that we never had any hard times that fills us with hope. You start remembering a little bit about what it was that God did for you when you had hard times. My wife and I have often told this story. We hadn't been married long. We're in the woods in Indiana, living at a camp. We don't have food stockpiled because we're about to be gone for a while. And we got hit by one of the historic blizzards. I mean, they write about it in history books. We are snowed in. I mean, snowed in. And roads are officially closed and all that. And we've used up every little bit of food we have in a short period, and nowhere near being supposed to get out. And I'm feeling terrible. I'm the world's worst husband. We're newly married. We haven't been through things like this before, and we literally don't have any food. And I mean, it's not that we don't have the food we want, we don't have any food. I make up my mind, I don't care what the conditions are. I'm driving to town and I'm buying groceries. bitter cold. I tried to ready myself for the cold. I had blue jeans on. I had sweatpants over the blue jeans. Shirt, sweater, and another sweater over that sweater. 2 pair of gloves. Hat, face mask. I digged for 2 hours just to get the car to the road. I get out on the road, and I actually start moving a little bit on the road. I said, this is going to work. And I've driven about a mile away, and there's a little place where there was a dip in the road, and the dip in the road has filled with snow. And apparently I'm not the first person that thought about trying to get through that, because there are 3 cars stuck in that dip. I took a look at that. I said, I'm going to drive on the side of that thing and get around it. And I hit the side of that thing, and pretty soon there were 4 cars stuck there. And I got out and dug and dug and dug. Could not get the car forward, could not get the car back. Weather is terrible. Wind chills like 60 below zero. I am cold. I am unhappy. I am frustrated. It's like it's the end of the world. I start to try and trudge the mile back. Farm country, and a lady comes out on her porch and sees me and says, you want to come in and warm up for a moment? I said, thank you. I went in. She said, what in the world are you doing out there? I told her the story. Big white building behind the house. She said, do you have any idea what we do here? I'm not the faintest man. She said, this is a chicken farm. We raise chickens. We butcher them. We prepare them. We package them. And we sell them to all of the grocery stores in the area. So she got a packaged meal, chicken and rice and chicken and this and chicken. And she has a warehouse full of them. She says, buy as many as you want. Give you a better price than the grocery store. I come walking back home with chicken dinners all like this and chicken dinners all like this. I come walking in. First thing Cindy says is, where's the car? Don't worry about that now. For the next several days, we had chicken dinners 3 times a day, but we weren't hungry. And every time we're challenged with a need now, you want to know what my first thought is? Wonder where the chicken's coming from this time. Because you know why God let me have that experience? Because it was good for me. And because it fills my heart with hope that I went through that and saw what God did with it. A few years ago, I pastored for 11 years in the city of Chicago. And that was an experience all its own. We were in the inner city of Chicago. We had a Christian school there, and that was its own experience. And the challenge of it financially was something we had to face every day. I was supposed to fly down here to Ocala. Coming down to Ocala, I think I flew to Tampa. Was going to end up in Ocala. I'm supposed to preach at a preacher's meeting in Ocala. We did not have the money for payroll. And so staff had gone without being paid, and our staff didn't make enough to miss a week. There just wasn't any money. And I am so discouraged. On the plane ride down here, I am just nothing but discouraged and defeated. And I get to the restaurant where they're having a banquet. They have a separate room. I don't want to preach. Normally I want to preach every day, but I just didn't want to preach. I was too discouraged. I literally, Pastor, forgive me, I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what the men would think if I just told them I had an upset stomach and I needed to go back to the hotel. But I didn't want to preach. When I lived here, there'd been a church in Orlando. They'd been through a hard time financially, and they had to do a lot to get out of the difficulty they were in. And they weren't trying to call a pastor because they were in such bad financial shape, and they weren't even bringing in pulpit supply because they didn't feel like they could pay anybody. And I found out about it, and I'd be out preaching every weekend. I said, look, if you want somebody on Wednesday nights, I made this deal with God when I was an 18-year-old Bible college freshman, that I wanted to be busy preaching, but that if God would keep me busy, I would never care about the size of the crowd or the amount of the offering. I said, I'd be honored to come preach for you on Wednesday nights. For 13 months, I preached for them on Wednesday nights. There were no offerings. Though there was one man in the church who would always hand me a $20 bill for gas on the way out. I'd preach for them for 13 months. And I'm sitting there as they're getting this banquet, pastor's banquet, ready. And I've not seen that man in years and years and years. And he walks in and sits down next to me. I said, Brother String, it's so good to see you. Well, thank you, sir. He said, by the way, he said, our church is doing good now. We have a pastor, and we're strong financially, and things are doing well. And he said, we heard you were having some trouble with the finances of your Christian school. And he said, you stood with us, and we didn't have anything. He said, we'd like to stand with you right now. Handed me a check that covered the whole amount that we owed. All of a sudden, I couldn't get to preaching quick enough. It's like, could you skip the meal and the music and just let me get up there? See, God lets us have the moments we need to remind us His compassions, they fail not. How about this? Verse 20. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. How about that to give you hope? It's not just what God has done for me in the past. Tomorrow morning, His mercies will be new all over again. Well, church I pastored right before we came to Florida. There's a lady in the church, but she's blessing. She was 89. She'd gotten saved in that church since she was 12 and had played the piano in that church since she was 12. She was just a blessed lady, and she had a lot of physical problems at 89, but she was faithful to the Lord. If she wasn't in church, she was in a hospital. And I mean this literally. There's one hospital in town. If she wasn't in the church Sunday, I just automatically went to the hospital Monday morning. I didn't ask anybody. If she went in church, she was in a hospital. And this lady was in the hospital dying. And I felt bad leaving. And they were calling a new pastor, but he wasn't going to be there for several weeks. And I felt bad, but everything's loaded for us to go. But I'm going by the hospital to speak to her before we pull out. I get there. There are people in a room. She asks them to leave so she can talk to the preacher in private. And I'm apologizing for the fact we're taking off. She said, it's all right, Pastor. I said, would you do one thing for me today before you go? She said, would you pray that I die today? Be honest with you, I had never before prayed for a church member to die. I'd thought about it once or twice. No, I'm just kidding. And I said, ma'am, she said, no, seriously. She said, nothing would make me happier than to die today. She said, my service for the Lord is done. There's nothing left I can do. Her husband had been with the Lord for years. She said, if I could just go and be with Jesus today, it would be the greatest thing that could happen to me today. And God had filled her heart with such peace that I got down on my knees by her bedside, took her hand, and said, Lord, would you take this lady to be with you today? You know what happened a little bit later in the day? She had to be with the Lord. See, she needed something that day. The old Puritans used to call it dying grace, that when a person is about to die, a believer is about to die, a faithful believer is about to die, God gives them this sense of peace about what they're going through. I preached on that one time, and a fellow in his 20s came up to me after service and said, Pastor, he said, I just don't have that. I said, are you dying? He said, you don't need it today. I don't need it today either. But one day, I will. And you want to know what will happen when I need it? God will give it to me. Because he's God. And that's what he does. We had, when I was in Chicago, we had a deaf ministry. God blessed us. I knew there's a lot of deaf people in the neighborhood. For 4 years on our prayer bulletin, I tell folks, pray that God gives somebody to work with the deaf. One morning, Sunday morning, a young man walks in, writes me a note. He has to write it because he's deaf, blind in one eye, and mute. He cannot speak. But he's just graduated from Bible college and lives 3 blocks from our church. He wants to serve the Lord. And the note said, would you like a deaf ministry? We communicated in writing. I said, yeah. We started deaf ministry. And God is good to us. Not only is he reaching deaf people, I get to lead his brother to Christ. And I get to lead his mother to Christ, and she's coming to church. His father is ill to the point he's not able to get out of the house. He's living bedridden there at the home. And he's not able to talk or communicate most of the time. And they just said, stop by anytime you want to. And I always knew the one door on the side was not locked. I stopped by one day. None of the rest of them were there. But he was there, and he was actually conscious. And I talked to him. I went through the plan of salvation with him. He trusted Christ as his Savior. Came back later, told the family he was not conscious when I came back. And his wife said, it's so hard to believe that he understood. I came back a little bit later, or another day, and talking with her, and we hear some mumbling from the room, and we went in there, and he was awake. His wife was there. And I talked with him a little bit. I asked him if he remembered my being there, and he said yes. I asked him if he trusted Christ as his Savior. He said yes. I asked him what that meant, and he did a good job explaining it. A little bit later, he went back to being unconscious and was never conscious again. And at the funeral, his wife said to me, do you think God did that just for me? Because I needed that so bad. Sure. That's the kind of thing God does. His mercies are new every morning. He knew his daughter needed that. Wasn't a problem for him to do it. He just looked down from heaven and says, that's what my daughter needed. So he gave it to her. He said, his mercies, they were new yesterday morning. And new again this morning. And I have a promise from God, they will be new again tomorrow. Does that fill your heart with hope? Does that give you a blessing? Does that do something for you? See, I don't know what I'm going to need tomorrow. I do know his mercies will be new tomorrow. By the way, at the very time that God is using Jeremiah to write that, Jerusalem was in the worst moments you could possibly have thought about. The whole name Lamentations is talking about sorrow. And Nebuchadnezzar, the conqueror, he is remembered in history as the ultimate conqueror of cities. He besieged 34 cities and took all of them, conquered all of them. He had a policy. He would announce to a city once he'd surrounded it, if you surrender, you'll be treated with compassion. But if you fight, when we break down the city walls, I will turn my troops loose for 72 hours to kill, rape, pillage, do anything they want. God told Jerusalem to surrender, but they wouldn't. And so guess what happened? The Babylonian army was turned loose on Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar, who knew that God had, through Jeremiah, given them the prophecy and told them to surrender, Nebuchadnezzar put guards on the room that Jeremiah was in so that Jeremiah would be protected during the devastation and the destruction. And if you read Jeremiah, it'll help you understand, or Lamentations rather, help you understand a whole lot better the things that are being said. Jeremiah is safe in his room, but he's hearing what's going on outside. The moments that Jeremiah was in and around and hearing were as bad as it gets. And yet God was letting him know his mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. How about verse 24? The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in him. What we have in the Lord, you can't put a price tag on. You can't estimate. I spent a week in 2005 in Syria, probably the most incredible week of my life. It's a militant Muslim country, and Christianity is basically outlawed. It's an unusual setting. Church there operating in the open. The pastor of the church had been the oil minister in Syria when he got saved. And he'd started a church, and he's still working in the oil ministry. His church is being persecuted even though he's a government official. He's on an airplane during the first Gulf War. Finds himself sitting next to Secretary of State Jim Baker from the United States, who's on his way to Syria. Syria was our ally in the first Gulf War. And Baker's on his way to meet with the dictator Assad. And so they're talking, and he's telling him about his situation. He's in the oil ministry, but about the church and the persecution of the church. They won't let the church meet openly. It's an Arab custom. When you ask somebody to come visit you, before you can undertake any business, you have to do something for them. I mean, when I went over there to preach, I had to let them, they said, we have to do something for you before you can preach. I said, that's all right, we have to. You can't preach for us until we've done something for you. They end up taking me to a tailor and getting me 2 suits made before I can preach. It's just what they do. So Baker goes in to see Assad, and Assad says, before we meet, you have to let me do something for you. Secretary Baker says, American officials are not supposed to accept gifts like that. He said, we can't meet unless I do something for you. So Secretary Baker said, I know something you could do that would please me greatly. That church over there that's being persecuted, let it come out in the open and operate openly without persecution. And I would consider that the greatest of personal favors. And so Assad did. He issued an order that church was to be left alone. That's how I was able to go over there and preach. What would normally be considered illegal. But because that church had that special recognition, I was able to go over there and preach a meeting in that church. And I was at that church. I'll never forget this as long as I live. We're having service, and there are a lot of Muslim militants. They're outside. They're trying to make noise and disrupt the church service. Pots and pans and just being loud and scary. And 3 little girls from the neighborhood who got saved at that church came to the service. I'd find out later they were 10, 11, and 12. And they're walking through that crowd of men who are looming over them. They're yelling at them. They're pounding the pots and pans, trying to make noise and scare them. They're holding hands as they try to walk their way through that crowd. I started to step outside, and they said, please don't go out there. You'll only make it worse. And every night, those 3 little girls would come to church that way. Just for the thrill of being with God's people and worshiping the Lord. And they sort of looked scared while they were walking their way in. But they looked so happy when they got in service. And they have a custom there. It's really interesting. After the service is over, they have everybody sit in this horseshoe, starting with the 4-year-olds, working around to the oldest people in the congregation or at the other end of the horseshoe. And after the service, they go around and everybody's to give a testimony about what they got out of the sermon, starting with the 4-year-olds. I'm going to tell you, that's an interesting experience. That'll put some pressure on you as the preacher to have something in the sermon. And they'd get to those little girls, and they'd talk about what a thrill it was to have God's word minister to them. And you know what they'd do the next night? The same thing. You want to know why? God's mercies were new the very next day, and the Lord was their portion. Say, what did they get for going? They didn't get money. They didn't get any prestige. You know what they got? The Lord. The Lord was their portion. And knowing that God is real and that He is at work in your life and ministering to your heart and lifting you up, that is something money can't buy. How about verse 25? And then it's added, talk about hope. The Lord is my portion, saith my soul. Therefore will I hope in Him. The Lord is good unto them that wait for Him, to the soul that seeketh Him. We spend our time running around looking for everything else in life and wonder why we don't feel blessed at the end of it all. Do you want to be filled with hope? When you seek Him, you know what the promise is? It's a promise that He will be good to you. I did not mean, say there, that you'll always be physically healthy. These are sin-cursed bodies, and sooner or later they actually wear out. I didn't say that you'll always be wealthy. I didn't say that every experience in life is one that you would enjoy. What I did say is that the Lord will be good to you when you seek Him, because you want to know what happens when you seek Him? You find Him. And God does something special in your life. When I remember what God has done through the most difficult moments, it fills me with hope, because I got an idea what He's going to do in the future. And it turns out that maybe all those most difficult experiences that I could think about and remember, that I would have said, if that ever happens to me, I couldn't go on. And then it happens to me. The things that were heartbreaking in themselves. Knowing what God has done tells me what God is going to do. And that fills my heart with hope. God bless y'all. Pastor.